day. Welcome to the CORY MORGAN Show. 45 minutes to try and make sense of the insanity of whatever's going on in North America, around the world, all over. Just an abundance of issues to try and cover and talk about. I've picked out a few, and we will dissect them and sort them out. This is a live show, so if guys use that comment scroll, send it out there. I see Freedom Honey and Jordan there. Chat with each other, send comments my way. I don't necessarily respond to every one of them, but I do see them, and it helps keep the discussion going. Just try to keep things civil. You know, we can fight better on X. That's a better platform for that. So in a little bit, I'm going to have Emmanuelle Faubert of the Montreal Economic Institute on. We're going to talk about healthcare in Alberta, and pretty much in every province, it's the same sort of issues going on. I mean, I know everything else is dominated with the federal issues, and we're going to talk about a lot of that, but we can't forget that all the other stuff is still happening while all of our federal nightmare is going on, and we still have to address those issues. Can't let them fall by the wayside. So I'll start things out to get things rolling on how we pay our bills. This episode has been sponsored by New World Precious Metals, and they're based right here in Alberta. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the average Canadian's savings. They've decimated my teleprompter. I can't get it rolling. There we go. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years, and they've saw 30% gains. Gold's really gone up, actually, this last few years. Almost doubled, I think, in the last 5. So, hey, save your hard-earned wealth. Get into gold and silver, guys. These are the ones who are going to help you with it. And they're in Alberta. Buy local. NewWorldPM.com. Get your precious metals. All right. And E-Sharp checking in there saying 51st state. Yeah, that discussion is carrying on. It's another one that's going on. Either way, getting on. Canada. I mean, we're in a crisis right now federally. It's a crisis. There's no getting around it, at least in the immediate term, with Trump's ridiculous tariffs. And they are ridiculous. But how that mess is going to be resolved remains to be seen. And it certainly doesn't help that Canada's parliament is prorogued and the prime minister is a complete lame duck. If nothing else, Canadians have suddenly discovered, though, how vulnerable they've let themselves become due to strangling the ability to export oil and gas products for decades. Canada has an abundance of resources, but the one that the USA values the most out of us are our petroleum products. And if the nation were ever to dream of putting serious pressure on the United States in a trade war, it would have to be through reducing exports of oil and gas to the USA. As it stands, though, the USA for our exports purchases over 90% of our oil and gas. They have a buyer's monopoly and allows Trump to shake Canada like a dog with a rag doll. Pipelines and export infrastructure take time to construct. In fact, in Canada, they take an impossibly long time. That's why investors have fled, projects have been canceled, and the federal government found itself purchasing the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Now, the entire nation is paying a terrible price for the short-sighted policies of an anti-energy government. But we have an opportunity approaching. This means with some optimism for a change. We can fast-track pipeline and export terminal construction in a way like we've never seen before. And that opportunity is the upcoming federal election. It's going to be called at some point. And in a democratic nation, nothing provides a more solid mandate than receiving the stamp of approval from voters in a general election. It's the one time when every Canadian has the opportunity to express themselves on issues and who they want to be governed by. I know it doesn't work out in the long run necessarily, but that's our best chance. Now, Quebec's been the main hindrance in getting energy infrastructure constructed to the East Coast. They use the nonsense term of social license and claim Canada doesn't have this imaginary license to build a pipeline. Well, what better way then, let's play the game, is there to garner this supposed license than to have it on the ballot essentially in a general election? Pipeline capacity expansion has the highest public support levels right now than it's probably ever had in Canada. No major party is going to lose a significant degree of support by campaigning on getting pipelines built across the nation right now. I mean, leftists, they despise Trump and Putin even more than they dislike pipelines. If Canada gets pipeline access to the East Coast, Canada will no longer need to purchase $200 million a year in Russian oil. And they could snipe some European oil and gas customers from Putin as well. With increased access to the West Coast, Canada could send its oil and gas products to the energy-hungry South Asian markets and reduce the discount we get on selling to the American buyers on the other side of the border. What leftists could resist the temptation to offer an economic middle finger to both Trump and Putin at the same time? And aside from the spite aspect, increasing Canada's ability to export energy products, it just makes good economic sense. Every business does better when it has a broader customer market. The only factor making pipeline construction economically unviable to both coasts is the government. Regulations and delays kill investment in its tracks, and it costs a fortune. It's a very easy problem to solve, though. The government has all the tools. We don't need more consultations. We don't need more studies. It's all been done for both the Northern Gateway and the Energy East proposal. Nothing's changed. The mountains are in the same place. The pipelines need the same routes, and the same chronic opponents are going to piss and moan about it, so let them piss and moan. No further studies, no licenses, no consultations are going to change that. The government must declare these lines of the national interest, approve them, clear the way, and get them done. We don't need the government building them. We've seen how well that works, the Trans Mountain expansion. Private industry, though, they would be willing, but they need rock-solid guarantees. A right-of-way must be charted across the country, and the naysayers need to be basically told to get stuffed. The first Trans Mountain pipeline went across some of the roughest terrain in North America, and it was done in 18 months with 1950s technology. We can build them quickly if we just get the governments at all level out of the damn way. Trump's going to be in office for the better part of 4 years still. If he sees Earth moving on new Canadian pipelines to the east and west by the end of this first year, he's going to take notice. Every major party must put the immediate construction of pipelines within their platforms. The biggest consultation of them all is an election. With that under their belt, whoever wins will have all the social license they need to get it done. And there will be no better time to do that than this year. To dally, well, that's just going to let the activists and bureaucrats slither into the project and it'll never get done. If that happens, Canada might as well get used to being the kid getting the sand kicked in its face at the beach. Because if this nation can't even build a bloody pipeline to the coast, it deserves to be pushed around. Well, that's what I got to say to start things off today, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Hey, Dave, how's it going? We got our news editor here with the other stories.
You know, Corey, you think about what's happened in the last 7 days since we last talked. It's incredible. I mean, every day is just like historic, it seems. You know, from the Zelensky White House to tariffs, it's crazy.
I mean, what's the term? I always mispronounce that, though. I write it quite often. Mercurial. You know, I mean, you just don't know where Trump is going. I mean, he's a kid with ADD on speed, and he just bounces all over the map. I mean, nobody can track what he's going to do.
And you've been poking the wasp nests of Trumpsters, haven't you?
A little bit, yes. The team Orange Man have been upset with me lately, but I'm sorry. I'm tired of it. He's not doing anybody any favors on either side of the border right now.
Talking about making a whole new order or new world order, it's crazy. So our Sean Polzer right now is putting together a story on Trump's tweets this morning mocking Governor Trudeau. So hopefully that's up now because he was supposed to do it while I was in here. Other stuff making the news this morning, we've got a guy who was convicted of second-degree murder in 2020, arrested in Brooks with a pound of meth. And a gun. Forgot that loaded Glock.
Yeah, it was Abdullah, if I recall.
Yeah, it was a second-degree murder, 4 years. I mean, it doesn't add up, you know, how these guys are getting out. Lots of other Canadian liberal election follow. We got, ironically, Chrystia Freeland says she's going to make Mark Carney her finance minister. Maybe you remember when she finally quit the role, there was all that talk about Carney replacing her. So now the shoe is on the other foot. Our James Snell up in Edmonton has interviewed Jim Bukaboom from Commodities. What's the name?
Boozicombe, yes. Market commodities. Yeah, they're kind of leverage. Yeah. Oh, great, guys.
About how the tariffs are going to affect grains.
Yes.
And that kind of stuff. And as you know, Mark Carney was in town last night holding a big election event, and we tried to go along to the press conference, and our Sean Polzer was denied entry by the Carney people, and there's some good video taken by his colleague Jen Hodgson. That's up there on the site, and I encourage you to read Sean's column about how Carney is hiding behind the skirts of 20-year-old students.
Absolutely, yeah, that video was just sad. I really did feel for the volunteer, you know. I mean, that's just the cowardly thing. Just stick the young person at the door to try and, explain why people who've been invited to the conference are...
Yeah, and we had an invite, and she said, okay, just give me a second. And, she seemed willing to let us in. We had the other mainstream media, and then she obviously got told behind the curtain, and she came back out and was, shaking a little bit and said, sorry, you can't come in.
Yeah, well, you're a volunteer. You don't... It's not in the middle. Is it more volunteer? Get at least a staffer who's making some bucks to take on that.
I know George Sahol was probably behind the decision.
Well, and you got to check your wallet and everything.
Yeah, there's probably, porch pirate himself.
Yeah. All right. That's it.
That's it. That's all. That's just this morning. I'm sure.
I know.
All hell will break loose this afternoon as it usually does.
Oh, I don't doubt it. All right. Well, thank you for the update. I'll let you get back to cracking the whip on those reporters to keep those stories rolling, and we'll talk to you after the show.
Thanks, Roy.
Right on. That is our news editor, Dave Naylor. As you can hear, yes, lots breaking. It's just constant, and it's changing by the minute, by the hour. So again, the reason we have those reporters going out to these events, even if they aren't allowed into them, and writing on the things that we are allowed to get into and so on, is because you guys have been subscribing. So I'd like to thank you who have subscribed already. And if you haven't subscribed yet, guys, it's $10 a month, $100 for a year, westernstandard.news/subscription. Take one out. It's just like an old newspaper subscription, and it keeps our reporters rolling. It keeps our columnists writing, and it keeps this show going. So if you subscribed, as I said, thank you very much. And if you haven't yet, come on, get on there. So yeah, on the federal front, it's funny, and you can get those stories that said at the westernstandard.news, and you can see the videos, and it's been interesting. Carney has been kept away from the press. They are really shielding him from any critical press. All of the politicians lately, it seems the trend is to go down to American outlets. I mean, Premier Smith was on MSNBC the other night. Carney has been doing American shows. Tweak there, she's been doing American stuff down south of the border as well. But they aren't talking to Canadian media, and they certainly aren't willing to have any critical things like a press conference. And that's what this Carney event was in North Calgary. So they sent out invitations, and that's what happened. So media outlets got these invitations, these letters saying, come cover this thing, ask some questions. So Jen and Sean showed up, and they had their letter, their invitation, but they gave it in. And then, yes, this poor young volunteer goes back, says, okay, just a moment, I'll be right back. And she comes back and says, I'm sorry, you're not allowed in here. So what do you mean? We got this letter, you invited. Well, I'm sorry, you're just not allowed in. So the Western Standard is basically banned from covering Carney's conferences. But talk about weak. How weak is he? If your candidate is your strength, your intent is to get the candidate in front of as many people as possible. And yes, some outlets are going to be more critical than others, but if your candidate can present themselves well, if they can give the answers, if they can do their job, you shouldn't be frightened of getting them in front of people. In fact, you should be eager to get them in front of people. I know once elections get going, usually, the hard part with shows like this is you get, every campaign is throwing out, hey, get our candidate on for this, that, you can only book so many people for so many things. Yet Carney is hiding. And I mean, he made that terrible, goofy mistake with what is it? It's some sort of a electrical item that was manufactured. I don't know, but he basically was BSing, and he said Canada was one of these top manufacturers for this. It turns out Canada doesn't manufacture them at all, and it turned into quite an embarrassment. And Carney's been getting mocked on social media for a number of other things. So their answer, though, is to hide him from it. Do we have somebody again like Trudeau? I mean, Trudeau, you can see his biggest problem is always when he goes off script, when he tries to think. Trudeau can read a teleprompter. Trudeau can listen to the earpiece and say what he's told. That's why he always does that little glass of water. Semiconductors. Thank you, Jacqueline. That's the item that Carney was talking about. But yeah, Justin, he gets a question asked, and of course now it's off script, so he stops. He takes a slow drink of water while the voice in his ear tells him what he's supposed to say. Carney, as we thought, was, at least he's a liberal, he's scary. That was the scary part. He's supposed to be smarter than Justin. And that's a pretty low bar to begin with. So, you would have thought that he'd be able to answer these questions, get on the spot, do these things. And he doesn't appear to be, which is really interesting. Carney is a political creature, but not an electoral one, right? I mean, he's always been there. Governor of the Bank of Canada, very tightly tied to politicians, of course, at high levels. Bank of England later on. But it's a different animal to campaign, to get in front of people, to get in front of voters, to get in front of media. And it doesn't look like he's adjusting very well to it. And the polls have been interesting in the elections. So we've been seeing a bounce, a surge, and it looked like the Liberals have been gaining ground, but now in the latest poll, it looks like they've dropped yet again. It's volatile. That's the only way to put it right now. People don't know where they want to go, and we are in such terrible flux. I mean, we've got, again, a prime minister. We don't know where he's going to be in short time. We don't know who the next one's going to be. We don't know when the next election is going to be, and it's just a brutal period of transition we're stuck in. So we'll see how that irons out. But now we're going to bring things back a little closer and bring in Emmanuelle Faubert of the Montreal Economic Institute. Because like I said, healthcare is a big issue. It's an important one. And they put out an interesting piece recently on congestion, basically, of beds in acute care centers, basically hospitals. And a lot of hospital beds are taken up by people that really probably shouldn't be in the hospital. So thank you very much, Emmanuelle, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So your piece put out, it said be up to 10%. That's just in Alberta, but I imagine this is probably a cross-country problem. We have a lot of people taking up hospital space that would probably belong in a long-term center.
Exactly. So we had a lot of what we call alternate level of care patients. So this means that these are patients that still require healthcare services, but not acute care or hospital services, but due to not having any other options, they end up stuck in those hospital beds and using hospitals' resources for uses that are not supposed to be.
Yeah, they're not supposed to be seniors care center or people with long-term disabilities. I've seen that happen in hospitals as well, that perhaps facilities that would be better suited are getting full. So somebody with a long-term disability of some sort is almost warehoused in a hospital. But if you get an emergency, or as we saw with COVID, those beds run out very fast.
Exactly. That's how we end up with hallway medicine, where we have people in closets or straight up in the hallway.
So I would imagine, though, the solution is to build or construct or bring in more long-term facilities and centers for patients to go to, so we aren't using the hospitals that way. But what are the hindrances? Why are governments not doing that then?
So there's always constantly efforts to building and transforming and creating new spaces. That's always being done. But what we're seeing is that the demand for these beds grows faster than the creation. So what we're seeing is that despite all the new beds, there's always more demand, which means that people wait a long time before getting access to those. Another solution would be to look into home care services. And if you look in Europe, like in Germany or the Netherlands, they have a model where they promote home care services, whether that is home health services or home support. So whether that is the help of a nurse practitioner or the help of someone to just help them cook, clean, or take a bath. These services are less costly than hospital services or institutional services, and would help people stay longer at home and also free up hospital spaces.
So I guess perhaps is some of the issue with this. I mean, a lot of those services, I've heard some of them advertised too. There's private services that do it. But if we got an ideological hang-up, I mean, that's a lot of a battle that's going on in Alberta, is outsourcing, for example, specialized procedures to private medical centers. Is there perhaps some resistance to outsourcing to private providers for home care or even long-term care facilities?
Definitely. If we look into long-term care facilities, a lot of it is controlled by the public system. For example, patients are directed by the public system to the different homes if they're not managed by the public by the public system. So if there was more flexibility in that regard, that would also help, because having all the eggs in the same basket does not really work, as we're seeing right now.
So have you been in communication? Like the Alberta government's the one you highlighted, but have you talked to governments? Are you seeing initiatives coming down the line to perhaps address this problem right now?
The initiatives we see all around is creating more beds. That's definitely an initiative that we're seeing across the board. Beyond that, there's a lot of restructuring that is being done in many places, so that will probably come down the line eventually.
So the new beds, I mean, that's a term we hear a lot. You know, we hear that in healthcare a lot. It's always about the beds. Usually they're talking about hospitals, though. They're talking about a centralized care model. As well, decentralized models, as you said, in European countries, how is that working out, though? Is that government funded for new centers, or are they paying for the private ones again to provide these?
Well, there's a variety of model, but if we look into the model I was talking about, which is called cash for care, that model is done through an insurance scheme. And the way it works is that then the patients are given an envelope. They're giving the choice of either go for the institutional route and go with the healthcare provided by the state, or they can get an envelope of money that will then be used to get home care services or home care supplies. So that's one of the model that is being used and that it seems to be working well for the population.
So it's interesting. It sounds almost like in a healthcare method of a voucher system is used for education. Let the individual choose the facility that best suits them or the type of care that best suits them rather than just having one standardized manner of it.
Exactly. It gives patients the autonomy and the freedom to choose what care services best suit their needs.
Do you think maybe some of the hang up might be a little bit on it? Unfortunately, it comes to liability. The lawyers get into things. If somebody was kept in home care, an incident happened, it ended poorly, and then somebody would say, well, that's the government's fault because they weren't in a proper facility having full-time care.
So, for example, in the model I'm talking about, the way it works is that there's also community-based vigilance in the sense that they're making sure that the care that the patients are paying for is being provided and that it is the correct care for them. So there's maybe akin to a social worker making sure that the care is being provided.
Okay, and so that 1 in 10, as you said, how did you determine that, though? How do you get those statistics when you go to acute care facilities and hospitals to find out who has been taking up which spaces?
So essentially, it's can be a very complicated measure, but then they look into a patient when they don't need that space anymore. They technically could be discharged, but due to lack of space elsewhere, they cannot be properly discharged. So then they are counted. We count each day that a patient spends in that position as alternate level of care days. And if you count for all those days in proportion to the entire stay and the number of beds, that's how you end up with these numbers.
So have you been, are different provinces doing some different initiatives across the country as well? I mean, we're all under the Canada Health Act, but of course it's administered by the provinces. Have there been better models in other parts of the country?
I would not be able to tell you more about that, but I know that a lot of effort is being put to improve long-term care for patients. And a lot of it is being done through creating new long-term care spaces, but there seems to be a bit of a push to try to have more home care services because let's be clear, most alternate level of care patients are elderly, and most elderly would rather age at home than in an institution.
Absolutely. I mean, we also hear of, people basically kind of getting divorced by senior center, when one has to go into a care center, but the other there isn't space for both of them and they end up in separate spaces. If they could be kept at home, again, you could keep potentially couples together much longer into their retirement, I would imagine.
Definitely, because also let's be clear, these long-term care spaces are designed to take care of patients that have a variety of medical needs. And the thing is that if a patient, let's say, only needs someone to help them take their medication on the daily or do the dishes or clean, they don't need necessarily the level of care that is provided in a long-term care home. That is why ensuring that these people that have, let's say, less complicated need can stay home frees up long-term care spaces for people that have more complex needs as well.
Yeah, so I guess is some of the hindrance perhaps a bit of the labor pool too, though? I mean, it's labor intensive to care for people no matter how you look at it. But if you centralize it, theoretically, you could do it with perhaps a smaller pool of people versus ones who are going around to a broader area for home care. I'm just playing devil's advocate. Would we be able to train and draw the people to be able to maintain that sort of care for people?
Well, let's be clear. Hospital care is a lot more labor intensive than just taking care of long-term care patients or even home support. So resources are being used in hospitals are a lot more intensive and are a lot more costly, take a lot more resources than long-term care and home care services. Also, home care services, they're not just health related. They can also be, as previously mentioned, support type care. So these are also less intensive in terms of resources, but also in terms of knowledge and ability.
Well, and I would imagine it's good for people's mental health as well. I mean, most people don't want to be in a institutional environment. And we know that if your mental health declines, your physiological health can often follow quickly. If you're in your household, you're going to have more access to your friends, your neighbors, and people coming by versus being in a hospital bed. So, I mean, switching to more of that model could pay off on a number of levels, I imagine.
Definitely, there's been studies that have shown that the elderly that were in more home environments, either more home style institutional care or at home directly, had better mental health outcomes compared to more medical institutions.
Great. Well, so was this presented or sent at least to the health minister and such, or you're trying to work with them to hope for better policy formulation?
It is publicly available, and if they want to discuss ways that we can improve wait times for long-term care services in Alberta and thus help overcrowding in hospital, then we'll be happy to discuss.
Excellent. Well, before I let you go, then where could people find your paper to see this in more detail?
So you can reach it at www.iedn.org.
Okay, and that's the Montreal Economic Institute. I just like to. I've had guests from your group. You're great, on a number of times. It's not just Montreal or Quebec focused by any means. You cover issues across the country, right?
Definitely. So it started in Montreal 26 years ago now, and we're also in Calgary and Ottawa now.
Excellent. Well, I thank you very much for that work. And, just pointing out we need more healthcare solutions. Lots of people are pointing out the problems and just pointing out, okay, we have a problem with 10% of the people being within there. How can we deal with reducing that while still caring for people? So I appreciate that work and you're coming on to talk to us today about it.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right. I hope we get to talk again soon. So again, that is the Montreal Economic Institute. And yes, they're a great site. And you can see they do some good common sense work. They do some studies. There's resources on there. Check them out. Google them. And, I think it's one of the only things that kind of holds them back a little. People assume it's just something based out of Montreal. That's the problem when you attach a region to the name of your group. But no, they talk about things across the country and often a lot of Western things. They talk about on energy issues often as well and cover things really, really well. I mean, it's good common sense talk, right? All of us, if we think about the same thing, if we get to our later years, you want to be in your home as long as possible. I mean, our healthcare resources are strained. They're overwhelmed. I mean, part of the, I've talked about that a number of times. The Canada Health Act itself strangles us. I mean, there's only so many things the province can do. And I get in those debates because every opposition party in every province screams at the government for not providing healthcare right. The problem is you can't provide it right. Our system is broken and they aren't allowed to diversify the amount of services. So the provinces, the NDP are in BC and guess what? Their healthcare is overwhelmed. And the UCP is in Alberta and guess what? Healthcare is overwhelmed. One of the issues and the excuses they made for the overreaction and the lockdowns and things during the COVID pandemic was that we can't have our hospitals becoming overwhelmed. Even when it was getting pretty clear that COVID is virtually harmless to people under 18 who are healthy, and that the survival rate for COVID is extremely high unless you have a bunch of comorbidities, it still made enough vulnerable people quite sick that they would overwhelm the hospital quite quickly because our hospitals are always operating already right on the brink of being full. So then they'd say, well, then we have to, lock everybody down and stop the spread of this 14 days to flatten the curve and all that baloney and everything. And the price that we're still paying for all of that mess today. But still, one of the things we should be looking at in hindsight then is why are our hospitals always on the brink of collapse? Always. And part of it, 10% of those beds are taken up by people who should be in long-term facilities, not in an acute care hospital. This ties in, unfortunately, to some of the things that Premier Smith has been trying in Alberta to get surgical centers outside of the general hospital because we don't need to have everything in that centralized location. I mean, again, if another pandemic comes, a real one, a bad one, and we do have our hospitals being overwhelmed, part of the problem that happened with COVID was a bunch of procedures got put off because they were all supposed to be done in a general hospital and they couldn't do them. If they were in outside freestanding facilities, we could still get people's hip and knee replacements done, get those items off the healthcare list while still maintaining a general hospital to deal with people with more acute things. But instead, we stuff everything into one centralized monster, and it's a giant bureaucracy. But we don't know what the heck's going on now in Alberta because there's a big scandal that's broken out because leave it to government to make a mess. It sounds like, and we're still waiting for the details. Now, there's going to be an independent inquiry in Alberta over what might be, I mean, we don't know yet. There's a whole bunch of allegations pushing all over the place, but basically, there might have been some backdoor type of deals or at least some sole sourcing going to people who are going to get those private facilities, pulling it out of there. I mean, people are receptive of getting into, broadening care and new options, but they do want to make sure that they're getting the best bang for the buck. They want to make sure that somebody's not lining their pockets with healthcare dollars. That's what mortifies people. They want those health dollars to be focused on healthcare, getting to the patient. Either way, it just makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, a person can make the rounds. I listen to, on talk radio and so on, you quite often hear ads for one of those home care things, and they talk about the family keeping mom at home longer and everything else. But that private service, I mean, they talk about it starting at I believe a couple or a few $1,000s a month. That's a lot of money. Now, keeping somebody in a hospital costs a heck of a lot more per month than that even. But if it's broader home care, just maintaining somebody, visiting a couple times a week or once a day or something like that, much better than a hospital. But unfortunately, our system is just so bloated, so bureaucratic. And I tell you what, the hang-up, the problem, most often is the bloody unions. You got to remember, if we start doing home care, you don't need an expensive overtime gouging union labor force to do that. You can have individuals, I mean, these aren't full-out nurses and healthcare people. They're people just to help with pills, help with bathing, help with some shopping, little things to help people and keep them out of the hospital. But it doesn't lead to that nice, big, sweet union jobs. So that could be problematic. And it's just a big, ugly battle. Common sense solutions, ones like Emmanuelle was pointing out, are there, but it's just so hard to get them done. And then, unfortunately, like I said, sometimes the corruption gets in and everybody loses. So I saw Wild Rose, a commenter earlier, asking about the US 51 concept, my thoughts on it. So that's something that this President Trump's really been rattling the Canadian chain a lot over of course, this for months now, calling Trudeau Governor Trudeau and so on. It stopped being funny a long time ago. People say, oh, it's just trolling. It's just trolling. Look, this is the leader of the most powerful nation on the planet who's talking about expansionism. And even if you're a supporter of the concept of Alberta or Canada becoming the 51st state, this isn't the way it's going to happen. In fact, I think we've seen more binding and bonding among Canadians. When you've got what you see as an external threat, economically at the least with these tariffs and such, you're seeing more Canadian flags being waved than we've seen since the convoy. And not because they're upset with that. They're saying, I am Canadian and I'm proud of it. So if you're independence-minded, if you're US 51-minded, it's not moving you closer to that goal at this point. A lot of people, I think, and I'm very much of that. I've put it on X. Look, we've got the Mr. Rath. He's going down to Washington to pitch the Alberta 51 idea and things like that. Okay, go for it. But it should be pitched to Albertans first. I traveled a lot. I did a lot of speaking events and at very independence friendly venues. And then one of the things, it was with Dr. Modry a lot. We were speaking together, and he would always poll the room with a straw poll and ask about what people's visions were for things. So, I mean, again, it's a stacked room. So he'd say, what would you like to see? Would you like to see Alberta stronger within a stronger province, but still within Canada? And a good handful of hands would go up. Would you like to see Alberta completely independent on its own? And most of the room's hands would go up. And then you see, if you like Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, you get a whole bunch. And he'd ask about the US 51. And usually that's only a handful of people. They're there, they're vocal, they want it. But even among the independent set, it's a smaller number. Now, the only way, I think in a principled way, And I know people will send me links. Oh, Canada's actually a corporation, or Alberta was never officially part of Confederation. All those weird shortcuts, whatever. I'm not even discussing it. I'm talking about the here and now. And if you're going to be principled about it, if you really thought a province or a region is going to step out, the only way it should happen acceptably is with a majority vote in a referendum. And a clear majority, not 50% plus one, because that's just a recipe for a nightmare. I mean, we're talking 60% of people got to get together, vote on it, and say, let's do it. And if anybody thinks we're even vaguely close to that tipping point of support to go US 51 at this point, it's not there. It's not, you're going to be a long ways from that right now. And the worst thing you could do if you are an independent supporter, if you're looking for that sort of thing, is to have a referendum and lose. That will set it back by a decade. That's one of the things Quebec figured out. That's why, even though they were only 1% away from a referendum win in the 90s, why they haven't held another one since. They're finally actually just starting to rumble about it again. Is because they said they're not going to do it again until they get the winning conditions. And they've been working hard for years to try and get those winning conditions. And the conditions haven't been there, so they haven't pulled the trigger. A commenter saying, Lonnie, so delusional Albertans want to join the USA. Okay, I'm not sure if you're saying it's delusional to think that Albertans want to join, or that I'm being delusional and you're saying Albertans want to join. If you really think that more than 50% of Albertans want to go at this point, I think you need to get out more. A number of people want to go, but not nearly a majority, not even close. And I'm not saying it'll never happen, but it's certainly not going to happen right now. And I've used the analogy before too. I mean, if you're being courted, if somebody's coming in and trying to woo you, and flirt with you and say, join me, partner with me, you play a little coy, you want some courtship and things like that. But when President Trump comes on like he has been, whoa, you're coming on a little hot there, buddy. Cool your jets. Let's talk. Let's negotiate. Maybe. He's putting people off. I don't think he cares. I mean, that's one of the things in general. He's just stirring that pot. I mean, realistically, again, with the amount of legislation, I mean, nobody's asked the majority of Americans if they want another state either. And, I think it's pretty important on their part. People are making a lot of presumptions. It's an interesting discussion. It absolutely is. And then people start talking along the lines of the better elected senators and other things that are available with the United States. Absolutely. But to the point of realistically looking at getting into that, we're just not there quite yet. But the discussion's on more than ever. I just don't think it's moving us closer at this point. It's moving us farther. And I mean, President Trump, how do you deal with him right now? He's ticking people off. I mean, people say it's strategic, but strategic to what? Give us a demand then. People say it's about the fentanyl. No, it's not. That's enough of that. Come on, let's get real. That's a problem. Sure, I'm not saying there's no problem with the fentanyl in Canada and things like that. There certainly is. But there's nothing, and he's kind of said there's nothing we could have done to stop that. The next day he's talking about a trade deficit. He's saying that he's subsidizing Canada by $200 billion a year, which is completely untrue. But that's his selling point. He says, we're going to end that. And then he says, we're going to take all the auto manufacturing back down into the United States. His terms keep changing with whatever he's talking about day by day. How do you negotiate with that? Premier Smith tried. She took the approach of going down to talk directly. I applauded it. I thought it was a good tactic. Head down to Mar-a-Lago. Head down to the inauguration. Make your case. But what happened? Pretty much didn't make a difference. Whatever Trump has in mind, there's not much we can do, it seems, that's going to impact that. As Kenzie saying, not being weenies to hang on to America's coattails. I mean, that's some of the things that we've got to at least, as I said in my opening monologue, strengthen ourselves. We've got to make sure that we can sell to other customers, because he's just shaking us around because he can. And it doesn't mean we have to be fighting with them, but you got to be on stronger footing. So if we're going to have a president, even if it's a future president, starting to be a pain with us, say, well, you know what? We can sell the biggest heavy oil refinery on the planet is in India. I'm sure they would be happy to get a few more tankers of Albertan heavy crude getting out there. People also, we were talking about light crude because they keep saying, oh, the Americans are the only ones who can process. That's not true. Plus, Alberta produces, 370, people forget, we talk about oil sands all the time, but over 370,000 barrels a day of light crude oil conventionally. And I think just about as much of that conventionally in heavy crude. Like, we got to look at things. Wilder was saying this isn't about border security or drugs. I think it's a Meyer about resources he needs. Yeah, I don't know. It makes more sense, right? There's an interesting with Tristan Hopper. He was putting on the National Post because President Trump, again, he took, and there's some of the things that frustrate me with him because he's such a BSer, and he is, guys. He is. I mean, if you look back only 5 years ago, because he ripped up NAFTA, or North American Free Trade Agreement, and he said, we got to make a new one. And he made the new trade agreement, and he trumpeted it. He said, this is the best trade agreement ever. He said that. He signed that. And now he's gotten in 5 years later, ripped it up and said it's crap. How do you negotiate with somebody who tears up your contract? How do you negotiate with somebody who basically campaigned against himself? Where are we going with this? What does he want? I want to get closer to the United States. I love the United States. But that means we should be integrating our markets more. Integrating, getting closer, having more business going back and forth both ways, having people going back and forth both ways. And right now, they're getting pushed apart. We're polarizing ourselves. And I'm a guy who likes stirring the pot. I like shaking up the establishment. I believe in that, absolutely. But I mean, at some point, you get to the point of not just shaking things up to make positive change. You're just shaking it up for the sake of shaking it up. When Trump spoke to Congress last night, he was talking about taking Greenland. Well, why are you going there? The Americans already have a base on Greenland. They don't need more access to that area. There's a military base there. They have an agreement with Denmark. There's a contract. What are you after? Because the people of Greenland have made it pretty clear we don't want to be American. Why are you shaking that tree? Why are you doing that? And I just don't see the end. I mean, people keep saying, oh, he's got a plan. He's got... Well, it's time to start showing it pretty soon. Make demands that stick then. We want to work to accommodate, but you've got to say something and stick to it. And it's bouncing around. I saw a good analogy or listened to one from somebody on a radio interview the other day. It's saying it's like trying to nail a piece of Jell-O to a wall. Like you just can't make a case. You can't dance fast enough to that guy's tune. And part of our problem too is having an absolutely weak, lame duck, incompetent prime minister. Trudeau, I mean, look how complicated this problem is for any leader. And having him in the front of the line, oh my Lord, are we ever in trouble? But I still want Trudeau out, and I want to see a better leader in, and I think it's probably going to be Poilievre. And I think he will be better than Trudeau, but I don't know how much, because you're still trying to negotiate with a man who is volatile as Trump. So we're in for some crazy, crazy times. The language out of Premier Smith yesterday was very much, she was standing apart from the Team Canada thing. She was standing apart from the Trudeau gathering of people, kind of, and it failed, and now she has jumped on board. So guess what? Trump is actually unifying Canada. So for people who want a unified Canada, who don't want to see independence movement spawning, Trump has actually been kind of their best friend in a lot of ways. Because I don't think it's making the independence sentiment grow. I used an analogy before too. I mean, if we look at it, people talk about Canada as like a big family, a dysfunctional family, and we're fighting. If you get two brothers, my brother and I used to pound the hell out of each other all the time. And they're beating on each other. They've had a few beers and they're going at it. That's fine. But if somebody steps in between those two brothers, there's a really good chance they're both just going to turn and start pounding on the third force. We didn't need Trump coming in the middle of our issue with Ottawa. That doesn't endear us to him. We'll take care of that here, or we should take care of that here. But that's not, because other people saying, oh, he's fixing things in Canada. No, he's not. He hasn't fixed a bloody thing yet. In fact, it's actually led to a bit of an increase of support for the Liberals. Because, as I said, when you get an outside external force, an external threat, people tend to rally together then, even if they don't like each other. Because I don't like you, but it's not his business to get in the way and start stirring things up with me and you. So Canadians are bonding. And I'm seeing bad attitudes. I don't like seeing that. I don't like seeing the vitriol thrown out on X. I don't like seeing people booing each other's national anthems. It's tasteless. It's pointless. It's divisive. The Americans are our closest friends. They are our allies. They are culturally the closest people to Canada by far on the planet. And for us to be pulling apart from each other is tragic and annoying and frustrating, and it didn't need to happen. And I don't know when it's going to change, because we just don't know where the hell Trump is minute by minute, much less day by day. All right, that's all I've got today, guys. By the way, my show's going to be expanding. There's going to be another one dropping on Friday, and it's going to be longer and covering a lot more on national and federal issues. And, of course, the pipeline's going to be on a little later, too, with our panel breaking things down. Because, yeah, there's just so much to cover. I'm going to have to take on another hour and a half to 2 hours a week to blather it on at you. So be sure to tune in and watch for those on all the Western Standard channels, guys. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Thank you for tuning in today, and we will see you on the next one.